Hello and welcome back to the Sleep Like a Baby podcast. I'm your host Hannah and I'm an infant sleep consultant as well as a mum living and working in South East London. So today I'm going to be talking all about sleep needs, particularly babies, toddlers, children who need less sleep than most of their peers. How do you know if you have a low sleep needs child? How do you figure that out? How do you make it work for your family? And are there any risks or drawbacks? Is your child going to develop less well if they don't get, say, as much sleep as their peers or as much as, say, other people in your life think that babies and young children should do? When I was talking about this on social media, lots and lots of people suggested my guest today, who is Paula Morales McDowell, and she is a fellow sleep consultant who I have followed on Instagram for years now and love her work because she has a child who is low sleep needs. So I'm really grateful for Paula to come along and share her story about how they figured that out, how they rolled with cat naps and late bedtimes and all of that stuff and just made it work for their family, and how she also supports low sleep needs families through her work as well. And I suppose we have children actually the same age, and I got to share my story of having kind of an average to high sleep needs child, and actually how different our two experiences are with, overtiredness, for example. And is that a thing? And how does it affect different children in different ways? Because we accept that not all adults need the same amount of sleep and that we're all different and have different bodies and different needs. And yet, for some reason, there is this idea in the parenting world that babies need a more generic amount of sleep and that all babies get overtired, when in reality, they just don't. But anyway, I'm not going to talk too much now because Paula says so many brilliant things herself and shares that with us. So I'm going to go straight into the interview and just want to say, as ever, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. If you could subscribe, leave a review, any kind of support for the podcast is always so appreciated. And thank you to everyone who has been leaving some lovely reviews already. It really means a lot and helps me get this podcast out to even more sets of ears. So thank you. The Sleep Like a Baby podcast is supported by The Octopus Club, the online marketplace where you can buy, sell and give away baby and kids stuff without any hassle. If your home is piling up with toys, clothes and bits of kit that your little one no longer uses, The Octopus Club offers an easy, environmentally friendly way of selling or donating things to other families. And if you're on the hunt for high quality second-hand goods, this is the place for you. Honestly, the stuff on there is gorgeous. Check them out on Instagram or go straight to their website, theoctopusclub.com, to sign up today. Hello.
Hey, so here we are. We're both hosting today, so that's interesting.
This is the first for me, but I'm excited.
Yeah, same. So I guess introducing ourselves. My name is Paula. You guys know me. If you're listening on my podcast, you are listening to Bedtime Tea with Paula. And if you are coming from Hannah's podcast, my name is Paula. I'm a sleep and well-being specialist, much like Hannah is. We do very similar work. We're very, as far as I've seen, we're very aligned in our views around sleep and sleep training. We just found out that Hannah and I have kids pretty much the same age. So like a week apart. So both of our little ones are turning 4 at the end of this month. And I'm expecting, currently I'm 36 weeks pregnant. So any day now. I think that's it for me. Oh, and I'm in Canada. I'm calling in from Ontario.
And so for listeners of Paula's podcast, I'm Hannah. I run an Instagram account called Little Nest. That's my business. And my podcast is called Sleep Like a Baby. And I'm also currently pregnant. I'm 24 weeks now. We're recording this. And as Paula said, we both have sons almost the same age. So
yeah, it's so cool. Do you know what you're having?
No, do you?
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're having a girl. Yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah, no, I'm trying to keep it a surprise, but
how
how do you feel about having a girl?
We're excited. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, like I would have been happy regardless, right? But
Yeah.
it is nice because we know we're done after this. So,
Yeah.
and my son was adamant from day one. He was like, it's a girl, it's a girl, it's a girl. But yeah, it was really cute. He like knew. So it's very sweet that he got it right.
See, my son is very, very like feels very strongly it's a boy. So maybe
Mm,
they know. Um,
maybe they do. Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Oh, now I really want to know. I can't wait to find out.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and I'm based in the UK. I live in London. Yeah, like I said, I live with my son and my partner, and very much on the side of sleep that where we aren't so pro sleep training. I'm very much in, I suppose, holistic and responsive strategies and working in the realm of normal infant sleep. So sure, if you're listening to either of our two podcasts,
Yeah.
that's what you're here for.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love the title of your podcast. It's like sleep like a baby, like, but
Yeah.
like a real baby, not like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That phrase is just torture for too many people.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because now I'm pregnant. I'm not sleeping. And it's not because of my child.
No, I know. I know.
Well, it
Yeah.
is because of the child inside of me, but yes.
Yeah. Our 36 weeks, that's the final stretch, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's rough. But yeah. So I know that I think you had opened up some questions in your Instagram. Is that how? And then somebody asked about low sleep needs.
Yeah, I was talking about, what do you feel isn't talked about enough, I suppose, or what do you feel is a challenge that you don't see with as many, that is you don't have friends with as many, with suffering from that. And so many people said we just need more resources on low sleep needs, and a bunch of people suggested you and was like, Paula has a kid with low sleep needs. So I thought
I
you'd be
love
the
that.
perfect person to speak to, because I've never covered that subject on this
Yeah,
podcast either. So
awesome.
yeah. So do you
That's
want to
exciting.
tell us a little bit about that, how you figured that out and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess probably I don't know your origin story, but I think like a lot of us just kind of you go into parenthood not really knowing much about sleep. And then you start to look stuff up and you start to find all these schedules online and all these things, right? That's kind of the first stuff that comes up. Um and I just remember, in the newborn days, I mean, he slept all babies, they just eat, sleep, and poop, right? But then as he started to get into like 3-4 months and whatnot, and he was a cat napper. That was the first thing. He was like sometimes a 45-minute nap was good. um and so I started to see the stuff online about they need to take longer naps, but also like I would just look up these sample schedules because I was like, how am I supposed to, and I would find these schedules and they just didn't make sense to me because it was like, okay, wake up at this time, go down at this time, sleep for 2 hours. And then, and I was like, well, how am I supposed to force him to sleep for 2 hours? Like, that's not happening. Like, I can't. And so pretty quickly, I think that's what really started to unravel for me, like the BS of it all. I was like, this doesn't make sense because I knew intuitively, like, he's doing great. Like, he's happy. As much as I would have liked those longer naps, like he was happy and he was sleeping decently at night, like he wasn't sleeping through, obviously, but he was fine. Like I was managing at that point. It wasn't until later that things got a little harder when for me, I always say, I don't know about you, but the 6 to like 9 month sleep was like harder. Um yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, I think I'm an annoying anomaly in that it wasn't, but we can come on to that later.
Sure, yeah. And everybody has like their one age where it was like, oh my God, that was so hard. Like I found the newborn stage to be fairly easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of how I came across with that. And then I started to sort of look into it. And then, fast forward, I think I want to say he was like 7 or 8 months, maybe, when I signed up to become a sleep coach, because I had kind of gone through everybody around me with sleep training. I was like, I don't like it. I don't buy into it. But it was also like, the extreme. I was seeing like either like bed share and like don't do anything ever again, or or sleep training, and I wasn't into it. So anyways, that's kind of long story short. But that was always one of the first things that I like looked into when I wanted to learn about sleep science, was like, how much are kids actually supposed to sleep? And what's the data behind it? And I remember when I finally came across, the Sleep Foundation has like their charts online that show like a range of what's an appropriate amount of sleep. It was just the most relieving thing for me. And because the range is so wide. And so just knowing like, it was so validating. Like I already sort of knew that, but it was just like, oh my God, yeah, like not every kid needs the same amount of sleep. And it just makes sense. Just like not every adult needs the same amount of sleep, right? And you're seeing all these things that are like, they need to sleep 12 hours at night and they need to take these long naps. And I was like, that's never going to happen from a child, but he's happy. He's like super healthy. He's meeting all his milestones. Like, why would I stress about it if he's clearly doing well? And I think that's obviously my beef with the sleep training industry, right? It's just like always making parents feel like there's something wrong when there isn't anything wrong. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of the story.
Yeah, and it is really stressful. I mean, the whole like routines anyway are stressful, even if your child sort of needs that amount, even if you have that child that fits that. I still think it's really stressful. And I suppose that was sort of my experience in that. I mean, I had the first year of parenthood for me was very different, I think, because my son didn't really sleep in the newborn phase. Like I never had that like just sleeping and pooping and feeding thing. He was just like, I felt like he was just born wide awake.
Oh my God.
And so people are always saying to me like how alert he was, and but it turns out that that wasn't actually to do so much with his sleep needs. It was more to do with kind of feeding challenges and other stuff, I guess. Like even when he had jaundice, I still felt like he didn't sleep very much.
Oh man, like, that's hard.
Yeah. But that's a whole other story. But then I found actually by about 7 or 8 months, we kind of found our groove. But that was for me at which I had given up trying to put him into this schedule. And I think that was the change. I don't think it was necessarily that sleep was any particularly better. I think it improved a little bit, actually, I think, which is quite unusual. And I'm sure that people hate me for saying that, but
well, it's different for everybody, right?
The biggest change wasn't just actually how he was sleeping, it was how I felt about it, because I'd given this guide, and it was everything about it. Like the premise is your child has to do a 2-hour lunch nap and sleep 12 hours at night. And actually, now knowing what I know, my son has quite average sleep needs. So in many of the ways, he would sort of follow a lot of, like, he would kind of fall asleep when they said it was time for him to. And if he was in a sling, he would often do a 2-hour lunch nap. Like, it wasn't,
I mean, it wasn't impossible.
It wasn't impossible, but
not like mine.
Yeah, exactly. But he never did anywhere near 12 hours overnight.
Yeah.
And if anything, I was just obsessing about all of these naps and trying to get him to sleep hours and hours and hours in the day. Like, in hindsight, he was probably just, and then I was expecting him to do 7 till 7 every night. And I wish I had seen some data about what is normal, because I honestly didn't see that stuff until he was like 1.5 years old. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so normal. I really thought I was doing something so wrong, because he would sleep 10 or 11 hours at night.
Yeah. And that's so common. Like a 10-hour night is like pretty standard for most kids. I think that is, I want to say the average for most babies is like 10 hours, I think, depending on what study you're looking at, but generally it's about 10 hours. It's like what they actually sleep.
Yeah, it's mad. And actually just before we logged on, I thought, okay, I'm just going to refresh my memory. And actually, I was on Instagram and Caitlin Klimmer was talking on her stories about a recent review. I don't know if you saw it. She just posted it.
Okay. Shout out to Caitlin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who's always really great at talking about data. I love the way she like phrases or like puts things forward with like the evidence. And it was a 2023 study. It looked at it was like a review. It looked at 93 studies of infant sleep, and it's so obvious that, and like I've got it here, and it's just saying like basically overnight between like 9 to 10.5 hours is the average for.
Is the average, yeah.
So when we're talking about like low sleep needs, a lot of people say like, oh, I often have consultations that start with, my child has really low sleep needs, they only sleep 10.5 hours at night. And maybe they are, but it's just funny how our expectations
not necessarily
is the gold standard.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just knowing like that, for me, that is like a tool that I use a lot still with clients, and that I find helps people, is just to know like, what's your kid's average, like what they need in a 24-hour period. And that's how we go from there, right? Like whether, sometimes there are parents who are like, hey, I would really like my kid to sleep a little bit longer at night. I'm like, okay, well then you're going to have to cap naps somewhere. Like you got to take it from somewhere. Like my sort of thing is like, this is how much sleep your kid needs. You cannot make them sleep longer than they need. That's just like, you can't, right? So figuring that out is so important. And that's the thing. I feel like I definitely come across a lot of babies who are being expected to sleep more than they should. They're taking these long naps, for example, and then they're like, my kid won't sleep 7 to 7. It's like, well, yeah, like they don't need that much sleep. So, but yeah, there's just a lot of misconceptions about how much sleep is needed. And that, so for me, that was a big thing finding out. I remember I did get sort of really into wake windows. Early on. And a part of it was because I found wake windows to be a lot more helpful than schedules, because at least I could say, okay, my kid woke up after 45 minutes. Now I start the clock till when I put them back to sleep, as opposed to following a schedule that's meant to have a 2-hour nap. Well, then now like that doesn't add up, right? So I really, really got into wake windows, but I certainly think I went over to the obsessive side of it, which I now warn clients against. Like, use them as a tool, not a rule. That's what I always say. They're not based on evidence. Your kid's brain development isn't going to be ruined if they're up longer than they quote unquote should, right? Like there's just no real evidence that like that they need to be awake for only a certain amount of time. But because I certainly went to the extreme again of like, I was so concerned about his wake windows that I was also putting him to sleep, I think, too early and fighting for naps. And that can also sort of continue the cycle of short naps too, right? Because he wasn't tired enough. So certainly understanding all those things was really helpful for me. Eventually, once I'm so looking forward to I'm sure you are, like having another one and just doing things differently the second time and not stressing about all those things.
But it just shows like how different all of our children are, and how unique their sleep needs are. And I think this is just what gets missed so much. And I hope that's the one thing that helps me have hopefully a calmer experience in second time motherhood, just because everything you said about your child is like the opposite for mine. So my son, I think he has quite average, maybe slightly high sleep needs, but I think he's pretty average. And he's very sensitive to overtiredness. So for him, he would go like, so wake windows can be really helpful just as like a common sense tool, right? Because I remember there were so many days where I'd look at my 4-week-old and realize he hadn't napped in like 6 or 7 hours.
Oh my gosh. That's probably a bit long.
or like he would have like he'd be feeding a lot and maybe drop off for 10 minutes in that 6-hour period, and that would be it. And so for me it was more like, oh, actually I need to put him down. Not even like, so if 6 or 7 hours is extreme, but even if say 3 hours one day, that would be a short nap for him, but 2 hours would be a long nap, right? Because when he was really little, that was, whereas your son, it's the opposite. You're putting him down too early, and then he's waking up because that's all he needs. So that's why this is so maddening, and why you talk to your friend and you're like, what am I doing so wrong? And they say, here's this routine, or here's these wake windows, and you try it, and then you can feel even more like a failure, because if it doesn't suit your child, it's game over.
I remember, so my son must have been around 4 months, and I had kind of gotten over this idea that like, he's just a cat napper, it is what it is. And I remember going to, there was like, I used to go to like these, they do, I don't know if they do this in the UK. They do sometimes here in like local movie theaters. They do like mommy events where you can go watch a movie with your baby. Um, and so, anyways, I met this mom. It was like the first time I had ever met her. And, you know, we got to chatting, kids were the same age, and it was typical, like, how's sleep going? Right. And I remember her saying, oh, yeah, it's just hard. Like, naps are really hard. I'm like, oh, what's the problem? She's like, oh, she only takes 40-minute naps. And I remember saying to her, oh, so does mine, but like, how's night sleep? And she's like, oh, it's pretty good. I'm like, so is mine. I'm like, I'm not worried about it. And she was like, oh yeah, I guess that's like fine. And I think that was like one of the first instances in which I was like, I really want to start doing this for a living, because I just sort of saw like parents just need to be told like it's fine. And you know, she was worried, but like there what like as soon as I told her like, no, mine does the same thing and I don't think it's a problem, she was like, oh yeah, I guess it's not a problem. You know,
It just comes with that is enormous, isn't it?
yeah, so it's just like we worry so much now. Okay, now I'm curious, so our kids are, again, they're both turning 4, so they're same age. What's his sleep like now?
Oh, well, I'm always scared to jinx it, right?
Yeah,
Generally, it's
knock on wood.
yeah, I mean, generally it's pretty good. Like he generally sleeps through, but I have to say I've been in his bedroom since I've been pregnant. So like
Oh,
6 months.
nice.
So that's partly we have a 2-bed, and my when I'm pregnant, I snore very badly, and
Oh.
turns out my son is much better at tolerating the snoring than my husband. So so we kind of alternate. So
That's
that
funny.
sometimes he goes with us, sometimes I do.
So funny.
Um,
I snore a lot too, and during pregnancy more so. And
yeah,
I had one day where my son came into my bed, because he's in his own room. He comes into my bed in the morning and he was like all cuddled up against me. I remember being annoyed because he was like in my space and I was like, oh my God, dude, like you're too close. And all of a sudden he like kind of half wakes up. He's like, Mama, go snore somewhere else. Excuse you. You're in my bed. Get out of here.
My son, I think we're like sleep twins, though. We're both very deep sleepers.
Okay.
And we need, I guess, a reasonable amount of sleep. We both get quite cranky if we don't get enough sleep. So
Fair, yeah.
I'm definitely a very high sleep needs person. I think this is why I do the job I do, is because that sleep was the part of parenthood I found the hardest, because I really would be very happy on 8 to 9 hours a night. Like 9 hours
Same.
that would be my gold standard. And I think it's really hard if you're high sleep needs and you have a
It's
child.
so hard.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Whereas my husband is more of like a 7 hours, he's fine. Whereas 7 hours, I'm dead.
Yeah. Same. I'm that. Well, lately it's like I just have to know. But like in terms of schedule, like what would you say is like how many hours he's getting? Is he napping?
No, so he hasn't
Okay.
napped for a year now. Unless we are on holiday, it's really hot, or we've been really busy, or we take a ill time our journey or whatever, and then he falls asleep at like 4. So generally he doesn't nap, and he goes to sleep at about 7:30 and he wakes at about 6:30. So
Okay. So like 11 hours.
hours is, and that's kind of been his average. So I think he is quite like I say, an average.
Yeah. And my son, I would say, is doing about 10 hours. So he goes to sleep around, these days it's like 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And then he's up at like 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even less, actually. And so, you know, looking at, and I mean, we can go over the averages. I have the Sleep Foundation up on my browser here, but like for preschool, so 3 to 5 years, the recommended is 10 to 13 hours in a 24-hour period, including naps, right? So same thing, right? Like, so mine is more on the 10-hour side. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes even less. And so they did change this with the Sleep Foundation recently, which I don't like, because they used to have it where this is the recommended and then this is the like maybe appropriate range. And they've kind of taken that away, but they do say that like it can go up or down an hour or so, right? So that's why I'm saying like he's on the 10-hour, but like maybe sometimes 9. Whereas yours is like 11-ish hours. So he's still not on like the 13-hour, like
But
super high,
sometimes he
right?
will do 12, like maybe once a week he'll bust out a 12-hour night. So I think he is on the slightly middle to higher end, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And he's also a real early bird as well. So I
Yeah.
would, like, when we go away, or we want, or it's like Christmas or something, and we want to be more relaxed and we want him to stay up later and be able to like come out for dinner, it is so hard to get him past 8 o'clock. Like, I work very hard for a 7:30, 8 o'clock bedtime every day, because that's kind of what we need for our working lives. Like, it's difficult.
Right.
Like, he would go to bed at 6 o'clock every night if he could. Like, he would,
Oh, wow.
like 6 till 5 every night. He loves an early night, and often
That's so funny.
to bed early. And sometimes I feel a bit mean, because for me, getting him to 8 o'clock is like me pushing him to his limit. But again, it just shows you how different, because like, and the grass is always greener maybe, and we compare, because I love the idea of, I have got lots of friends whose kids do stay up to like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and then
Yeah.
they play it. I'm deeply envious of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
right. Like both have their pros and cons, right? And it's so weird because when he was like little, like 4 months, 5 months, whatever, he was like a 6 o'clocker, and then he was up at like early too, and I hated it because I am not a morning person.
Yeah.
And I don't know how like it shifted over the years, but yeah, now it's like it was like his bedtime. We tell him his bedtime is 9 o'clock technically, but we just never get him to bed by that point. But yeah, like it right now in Canada, it's with summer coming, like it gets dark quite late. So it is nice. And that's part of why it's gotten later and later. It usually does in the summer, just because like it's getting dark at 9:30. Like there's just no way he's gonna go to bed earlier. But I do love that he sleeps in. And and then for me, the issue is that like I'm not a very schedule oriented person, and so it's usually me having to wake him up in the morning to get to daycare, and so like we're just the people that are like running late in the mornings.
I'm very jealous.
Yeah, I get that.
Like, for hours here, please take him.
Yeah, I used to, when he woke up like it's been now, like as his schedule has gotten later, like he wakes up later, or like I have to wake him up. But before, I would just like constantly just be like, here's a snack, go away, let me sleep. Or in the weekends, it's like, go watch some TV. I'm gonna stay in my bed. Like I'm very relaxed about that, because yeah, I mean, I like to sleep. So
I think there are pros to having a low sleep needs child, because I think we should acknowledge how, I'm sure you know this, but like how frustrating or hard and long the days are when you're not getting those like lovely long naps and those breaks. Like, that's quite,
it's hard.
And then you're not getting an early night. The days are long. Being a parent is exhausting, and
I remember when he dropped his nap. So he stopped napping pretty early too, like around 2. And that tends to be the case with low sleep needs kids. They drop their naps a bit earlier. And it was so great because he was going to bed at 7:30, right? It was like, oh, he's exhausted. He's passed out and he's sleeping all night. And then it just sort of like that kind of eventually changed to the point of, like he just doesn't need much sleep now. But anytime we kind of had a nap transition like that was really nice, because he would go to bed early. And I was like, yeah, we got like a longer night. And then it sort of goes back.
Because I say that my son dropped his nap about a year ago. Realistically, throughout the age of 3, he has gone through phases where it's come back. And so like he stopped. So actually, how old was your son when it was gone for good?
It's hard to say, because even to this day, he will randomly take a nap. But like even before 2, he started like skipping naps. I would say by like 2.5, he was pretty consistently not taking naps. Yeah. And then
it's not crazy. I don't know why I did it. I think it's just because it's so different it's
different. And so many people, I remember, like people who had kids the same age were like, how do you deal without a nap? And I'm like, you just do. Like, I don't know. I can't force them. Right. And it was also, for me, it was a bit of that same idea of like, I could sometimes get him to take a nap, but then it was like, oh, now I'm up till much later. So it was like, it was like that catch-22. Oh yeah, I get my break in the middle of the day, but now I'm up late. So
Yeah.
You can't win. And that's a lot of times what I say to families too, is like, you have to sometimes choose, like, where do you need your time? And I think, while I do believe in following your child's lead, and obviously, again, you can't make them sleep more than they need to, you can play around with it sometimes a little bit and be like, okay, you know what? I need that longer nap.
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay with that later bedtime because I need that middle of the day nap.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you're like, you know what? I'd rather they don't nap so that they can go to bed early, and that works for me. As long as your kid can handle it and obviously they're not miserable, then do that, right? Like, so you can play around with it a little bit, but certainly there's less to play around with if you have a lower sleep needs kid, because there's less there.
You can definitely see like the drawbacks, in the sense of like, you're not getting a break, they might drop the nap earlier, all of those things. But then I think the positives seem to be that you can have there's more of an element of flexibility. So
Absolutely.
that if they skip that nap at 18 months, it's not going to it's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to have like a massive meltdown like that. So there are like pros to it as well. It's not all negative.
Absolutely. And and this is why I always talk a lot about with my clients about trial and error, because that was something that happened to me where, again, he was like under 2. And I remember there was this one day we had gone to like the farm or something. I can't remember. We were driving. So like, usually if we're going on long drives, he'll fall asleep, right? And he hadn't slept all day. And I was like, he's fine. Like he's handling this great. And, again, this whole idea, and this is why, like, I often say to families, once your kid gets to one nap, to try and forget about wake windows, because it's so easy to be like, oh my God, they're only supposed to be up for 3 hours and now they're up for 6. And but like, observe your child. And then there are some kids, like you mentioned about your child, who are easily overtired. So you do need to protect that a little bit. Whereas I know with my son, I don't have to worry. And like, if we're out, like, or if it's Christmas, or like we have family over and he's excited, like my parents were here this weekend. He absolutely adores them. So he was up super late with them and he's fine. Like, I don't have to worry about that. And, then he'll just either sleep in. Actually, I think on the weekend, he didn't get much sleep at all because he was so excited. Like, he didn't want to go to sleep. And then he was up early because he wanted to play with them. Right. So he got less sleep, and that's fine. He can handle it. And then he'll make up for it later. So it's just like, for sure, that's the pro for something like that. Whereas, again, some parents I know with a kid this age, or even maybe a little bit younger, maybe like a just turned 3-year-old, if it's like, oh God, if they don't get their nap, we're going to have a rough day. Right. So yeah, pros and cons there.
Yeah, because I remember when my son was 2, we had this little holiday and we had loads planned every day. And I was like, oh, he can just, we'll just fit in the naps, whatever. I was trying to be really relaxed. We were coming out of lockdowns and I was like, I just want to like go with the flow. I just want to have some freedom finally.
Yeah.
And like halfway through that week, we just had to sort of cancel everything because he was a hot mess.
Yeah.
I like the 3rd day, because he had actually only been having like 30-minute naps in a car here or there, and bedtime was getting later, and he was having a miserable time. And we had to spend a day where we like stayed at home, and he like slept like 3.5 hours in the middle of the day.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And then after that, he was a different child again. So yeah,
so crazy.
So I think sometimes it sounds like, oh, it's amazing, your kid naps so much or sleeps so much, but then the drawback is you're always having to facilitate that, and that takes away an element of flexibility. So if anyone listening to this has a really low sleep needs child, and they're just like, oh, there's that positive that you're not having to.
And I was do that. And like I guess same for your son, like when the pandemic hit, he was like 9-ish months. So before that, I was out all the time. Like I'm the type of person, like I need to go to like the baby groups. Like I just cannot be home. Yeah. And I was just like out and about with him all the time. And I was like, he would nap in the stroller a lot. Like he just took a lot of on the go naps, and I just knew that they were going to be short anyway. So I didn't have to worry. It wasn't until later. And I think, some of it, again, it's one of those things I'm excited to kind of do over, because I think I stressed a little bit too much about when he was like a 2-nap schedule, it was like really complex. And we were trying to be home for naps more and whatever. And I found that really stressful, because it was like not easy to figure out. Whereas when he was little and he would just kind of take quick cat naps here and there, it was like, whatever, he can nap anywhere.
Yeah.
So it was really easy in that regard. And I didn't have to worry too much. And I am lucky too. He's he can get distracted when it comes to falling asleep and whatever. Obviously, as a baby, it was a little bit easier. But once he's out like a rock. Like
Oh,
this
good.
kid, yeah. These days he's falling asleep by himself most days. Because again, it's like he really will stay up late if you let him. So like now our thing is basically he has this little light next to his bed that he likes to turn on, and he likes to read books, and so we just let him read books by himself until he falls asleep. And then I go in there and turn off the light because he wants it. He would keep it on all night if he could. So when I go in there, I have to like reposition him and cover him, like tuck him in and whatever. And I could literally probably throw him and he would not wake up at that point. Like he's out. So it's great. But that's kind of also what we've had to work with, because we did for a while have like our, long bedtime routine and whatever. But now it's like he's going to bed so late. I'm tired. Like I'm just like, okay, dude, you don't want to go to sleep. Well, I'm going to my bed so you can go read books, and I'm going to go to my room. And that's working out really well for our family right now. So, it's different for each, for each kid.
And did you find then, like that other people had opinions about how potentially little sleep your son was having?
To this day, my mom just this weekend was like, he's not getting enough sleep. And I was like, does he look like he's fine? And I just kind of like got it, like rolled my eyes at her. But it like, people will say that like it's not enough sleep. But I think it was mostly that. I don't talk about it with too many people. It's not like something that a lot of people are aware of, like how much sleep he gets. But yeah, I'm sure lots of people would be like, that's not enough. And I've seen this in sleep trainer pages where they're like, I remember there was one that I was looking at and she was talking about how much her kid was sleeping, and it was like very high sleep needs, like very, very long naps, long night, whatever. And so somebody had mentioned like, oh, it sounds like your kid's high sleep. She's like, no, that's just what all kids need. And I was like, like it makes me so angry, because I know that there's a mom reading that's got a low sleep needs kid that's thinking like, what am I doing wrong? And what, like, I always say, like, life is too short to spend it fighting with a kid to sleep. Like, it is just not worth it for anybody's mental health.
Because even if they're high sleep needs or low sleep needs, if it's a battle, it's a battle, and it's not going to work. Like, even if they're if they're fighting it because they're super overtired and they're dysregulated, you're going to lose it. Like, it's not worth being in that room for. If they're low sleep needs and they're not tired, it's really not worth being in that room for an hour. So either way, cut your losses.
Yeah, it's
just deal with what's happening, and then you can come back to the sleep.
Yeah. Did you get comments about sleep at all, or?
Just thinking maybe this is one of the nice things about being like pandemic parenting, was that I felt like, obviously, like, for the first sort of 8-9 months I was out and about, and I was comparing myself constantly to every single baby I met, because that's just where I was at my head, and I was reading all this stuff, and I was like fascinated in how much better everyone else was doing than me. And so if I knew someone that did I had a friend that their baby did all the things they were supposed to be doing according to this diet, and then actually in lockdown, I think that was at that sort of, when I say things got better at around 8 months, I think it was around that point at which I just stopped comparing. And then but I still actually think that sometimes, because a lot of my friends have kids that go to bed much later, and I'm sure sometimes people will be like, why are you rushing home for bedtime? I don't know. It just doesn't bother me anymore. And I think maybe that's what lockdown sort of taught me, is that actually you can just crack on, and in some ways it'll be strange to do it, hopefully without any lockdowns this time, of like being more kind of open to other people's opinions, I guess. But
I mean, I think it's also what we do for a living, right? So I don't think a lot of people are willing to argue about sleep with me, because I'll just be like, okay, cool, thanks, bye.
Nice.
Yeah. Nor am I like asking for help either, right? Like I'm not going up to anybody being like, oh my God, like I'm struggling, like whatever. So that I think makes a difference. The one thing I will say too, and I think this tends to come hand in hand. It did make it hard. And again, I think that's why I struggled in that, like kind of at that age gap, at that age point, is because it makes it hard to get a schedule with a low sleep needs kid. Because it's so kind of like on the fly, and they tend to like, just need like little cat naps here and there. And so I do remember at that age, like envying people who could be like I wanted to set up play dates, and someone would be like, okay, let's do it after afternoon nap. And I was like, how the heck do you know when afternoon nap is? I was like, what does that mean? I had no concept. And so I really wanted to get him on a schedule for that. And he was just never going to do it. And so that I found, and so, and that honestly is part of what gets really nice. Once they get to one nap or no nap, it gets so much easier to like schedule your day and know, like, you don't have to worry about getting back to a kid sleeping. But that was a struggle for me. Like the 3 to 2 and the 3 to 2 nap transition took forever because
short naps. Yeah.
In order to get a 2 nap day, I needed longer naps because I couldn't, like, his naps were short, and then it would be too, I was always in that, like, it's too late to throw in a third nap, but too early for him to wait till bedtime, like, and so I struggled with that transition quite a bit for that reason. So yeah, that's kind of where it's like, some people are like, oh, ours happened naturally. And I was like, not for my kid. It was really hard to figure that out. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah, that's such a good point about having that predictability, and so flexibility is great, but sometimes having a little bit of, I know what the day's going to look like helps as well. Yeah,
for sure, just like knowing what it's going to look like, it can be tough. I don't know if this is helpful for anybody who's reading. What I will say is look up the Sleep Foundation. Anybody who's listening, not reading. I'm gonna go over the hours if that's okay.
Yeah.
So what they say, and again, the reason I like their recommendations is because they are rooted in research, and it's really, and I actually had a conversation with Laura from your science team recently, and we were talking about how really we can't know what's an appropriate amount of sleep for kids. We just know what the averages are across the world. Like, that's all. There is no way. And even like with adults, like whenever you see these things that are like every adult needs 8 hours, BS. Like, we don't know that for sure. And we know that some people function fine on 5 to 6 hours of sleep. Like, they do. I'm jealous of those people. But so keep that in mind. So what they say for infants, 4 to 12 months. So there isn't really much guidelines for under. So 4 to 12 months is 12 to 16 hours, including naps. The maybe appropriate range is 11, used to be 11 to 19. Oh, wait, no. 4 to 12 months, excuse me. 10 to 18. Yeah, so I actually have the old chart here, I don't know why they changed that. So it used to be for birth to 3 months was 14 to 17 hours is the recommended, but maybe appropriate as low as 11 and as high as 19.
Yeah.
So, like, that's a huge range.
Yeah.
And again, the maybe appropriate is basically saying, like, this is on the either too low or too high. But if your child is doing fine, if your child seems happy, like everything else is well, then it's probably fine, right? Like, that's kind of how I read it. I have people who say, like, their kid is in the range and they're getting all the hours that they need, but they're miserable, they're exhausted all the time. Like, then of course we need to look into that, right? So it's really focused on your kid's behavior, but kind of knowing the range helps. And then so now for 4 to 12 months, it's 12 to 15 is the recommended, but like 10 to 18 may be appropriate. And so, yeah, they did change it because, 12 to 16, they're saying is recommended. So,
I mean, it's a huge range, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what I say to people. So so again, the recommended range for 4 months is 12 to 15. So if your kid only needs 12 hours of sleep, they are not going to do a 12-hour night. They are going to do probably a 10-hour night and a couple naps, or a few naps, short naps in the day. That was probably what my son was like, right? And so again, like this whole concept in the sleep training industry of like the 12-hour night and these long naps, that's not happening for that 12-hour kid. And as for the Sleep Foundation, that's the recommended. Like, so that right there is huge, right? And then for like 12, 1 to 2-year-olds is 11 to 14 hours, including naps, is the recommended. And then preschool, like we said, was 10 to 13. So like I said, my son is a 10-hour night and he's good. And some kids there are kids who are still taking a nap at this age. They might take, if you're on the 13-hour range, your kid might take a 1-hour nap and sleep 12 hours a night, right? Yeah. So it's always interesting to look at those averages, I find, because it makes such a difference. And then it's easier when you're looking at your friends going, why are they sleeping so much? Well, that's why. It's because they just need more sleep.
And I wanted to come back to something you touched on, because I think it's a question I get a lot, is how do I know if my child is low sleep needs, how do I know if they are under or overtired? Like that, especially when we're looking at like resisting sleep, for example. And I think it is a really tricky question.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I really think, you have to get to know your own child. And I always say trial and error, right? Like I learned through trial and error that my child could handle longer awake times, so that he's more likely to be undertired than he is to be overtired. He can get overtired and he will like sometimes, run wild and you're like, okay, kid, like you need to sleep, but like it won't affect his day. Like it won't be a big deal, but it's more likely that he would be undertired and I would be trying to put him to sleep and he'd be fighting it and yada, yada. Whereas you mentioned your son is prone to being overtired. So what does that look like for him?
Well, I think you're just spot on with the trial and error element, because it can look almost the same in the sense that my son can get, so many times, like my mother constantly, I don't know why you're trying to put that child down for another nap. He's clearly not tired, but
all the time. I got that all the time.
But, I think that's okay. But he just would, he just would power on through, but get really dysregulated. So for him, he'd be super clumsy, really fussy, like just escalate at like the slightest thing, and it would look kind of, and then he would be hard to settle. So for him, that was his overtiredness. It didn't look like yawning or eye rubbing, as it often doesn't, but I just learned, I suppose, through kind of guesswork and seeing throwing a few different things at him and seeing, okay, I noticed actually on the days that you get a couple of longer naps, you're happier, you're more settled at night, you fall asleep better. On the days when I push it too far, you get a bit wired, a bit ratty, and it's hard, you resist the sleep, and that's what it is. It's like you say, it's about getting to know him and just seeing it. But there are a lot of approaches, like for example, like the possums approach, which is all about sort of pushing the sleep pressure, and I think that can work so well
for a kid like mine.
Where you really need that. And whereas if you've got maybe a child with a slightly more sensitive nervous system or whatever, who gets overstimulated really easily, who gets really wired and like my kid does, then it would have been a disaster, because on those days when he was going 6-7 hours, he was just like,
well, you tried, right? You did that whole holiday thing, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up, because people ask me about possums all the time, and overall I think it's a great program and I think it's better than most things out there, but I do think that for sure it's going to work better for those low sleeping kid as opposed to some kids that do. And like, I have a friend who, again, has another kid the same age. And I remember her being like, he needs that nap. And it needed to be a long nap in the middle of the day where my kid was already dropping his nap. Right. And so, and you just, again, I know it's frustrating for a lot of parents because I always talk about trial and error, and I know it can be like, just give me an answer, but there really isn't. And this is why, like, I actually urge people to be cautious of any sleep consultant that's telling you like, these are the signs, because it's different. Even like sleepy cues, like some kids rubbing eyes is a late sleepy cue. For some kids, that's an early sleepy cue. Sometimes their eye is itchy. Like, it just like, it really is it depends. With my son, I kind of notice he gets quiet and he kind of starts to slow down, and I'm like, okay, you're tired. But a lot of times he doesn't have sleepy cues.
Yeah.
To this day, like it's more like, dude, it's late, let's go to bed. And some kids do.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it really, you'd really just kind of have to get to know. And then also, I guess the other question is, so I guess you did cover this, but like for you, if he was overtired, there were consequences, as in like he would be miserable later in the day, like he wouldn't get enough sleep and that. Whereas I didn't find as much of that. I did sometimes, but I didn't have that, like he could recover easily from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Whereas, my son, not so much. It is scary. Like, for example, if you've got like a early rising situation, right? And for my son, that's normally to do actually with overtiredness. And so like the last thing you want to do if you've already got a kid who's waking really early is trial an even earlier bedtime. So I do get that like trial and error can be really scary because that is a gamble. But I know for my child, that will get him to sleep longer. If I when I see he's really exhausted,
Yeah.
like, right, we're going for a 6:30 bedtime, and then he will catch up.
Mm-hmm.
I know for like my friend's child, that is an absolute recipe for disaster, and their child will wake
That
up
would be me.
in the morning. That would be so. Yeah, I'm also people that will, when you see Instagram Q&As and things, and people are saying this is the answer, or even just like, oh, you need to cap the nap. Maybe you don't need to cap a nap. Maybe they need a longer nap. We don't know this about your child, and it makes it harder someone answering the questions because you need so much information about their sort of sleep history to be able to. And even when you have all of that, sometimes it's still a process of trial and error.
Totally. And it's so good that you say that. And that's the thing why it is so hard sometimes to answer questions on Instagram, because people will ask very specific questions and I'm like, I don't know your kid. Like I need to know so many things. And with clients, I can get into that, right? Whereas and I can ask the questions like, okay, but what do they look like when this happens? And like, how do they behave? And what do you notice? And what is it like on these days versus these days, right? And so, yeah, but if I'm answering a Q&A, I will sort of lean more towards that side because that's what I experience. Whereas I'll be like, yeah, maybe they just need less sleep. Whereas you might be on the side of like, maybe they need, and I've had people tell, but I always try to present it, like tell people like, it's maybe this is the solution, but like, I don't know for sure. Whereas you will see that presented a lot, I find, in sleep training circles of like, the reason every kid wakes up early is because they're not going to bed at 7 p.m. And it's like, that's so dumb. Like not every kid needs to go to bed at 7 p.m. There's no like truth to that.
There's no science behind this magical 7 p.m. being bedtime it's such a weird cultural obsession that in other parts of the world is like ludicrous,
Australian sleep trainers are big on the 6 p.m. bedtime. And I'm like,
oh, what?
That's like not realistic for a lot of people.
Like, what if you got a job?
Half the time we're like not even having dinner at 6 p.m. here.
My son would like a 6 o'clock bedtime, but I can't physically get him.
Yeah.
We can't finish work and get him like.
Like it's too early.
When he dropped his nap, I had to pick him up at like 4:30 from childcare, and he was going to bed at 6, and he would then sleep from 6 p.m. till 7 a.m. the next day for
my God.
It was the best month of my life. I was like loving it. And I would just start work again after he'd gone to bed. It did not last. But I was like, for like a couple of weeks, I was like, this is my dream. This is what they all talk about, the 13-hour night. But no, that didn't last. But I think it's important to remember that 7 o'clock is very much a cultural idea that works for some children, but it depends on so many factors of where you are in the world. And I recently had a client in Saudi Arabia, and it was so interesting to talk to her about how, the heat dominates when everyone eats and sleeps. And she was like, everyone here goes to, like, the babies, you would never put a baby to bed before 10 or 11 o'clock at night because we're in the desert, it's hot, like we can't, but they sleep in the morning. And
and even with naps, and I've talked about this too when it comes to dropping naps and whatnot, it is so cultural. And for example, in Spain, right, you have like, it's very common for people to take a siesta, right? So even adults will take a nap. And so then therefore they have a shorter night. And so, I remember when we traveled to Spain, seeing kids out and about at restaurants, like at 9-10 p.m. It was pretty normal. They would just hang out with their family, right? Whereas in the States, it's sort of like children need to be in bed at 7 p.m. So it's just different. And so there is a bit of, I think there's like that biological need that your child has, and there is also that cultural perspective where like if your same child who likes to go to bed early, if you guys moved somewhere like that, you might end up having a child who does go to bed later, because he would just have to adjust and he would still have the same amount of sleep, but at a different time.
Yeah, like I had a client in Portugal, and so she was British but living there, and so her oldest child was about to start school, and even in like up until about, I think, Portuguese people can correct me, but basically it was school age children still had a siesta built into their day. So she was saying, as a British person, I would really like my children in bed at, like by 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
my culture, and my father and I would like that, but like he's 6 years old and going to school, and they give all the kids have a siesta because it's really hot. So she's like, I can't. And I thought that was interesting. And I grew up in I spent the first 5 years of my life in Singapore. So my mum woke me up at 5 a.m. every day, or like I would wake at 5 because that was the coolest time. And my brother and sister started school at 7 a.m. So yeah, 100%. Would I be a different if I'd grown up in the UK?
Yeah,
been different probably. So I think we just need to
and so interesting that you point out the heat, because I do find for everybody in my family, like especially my son and I, like in the summer, we're more likely to take a nap, but also more likely to go to bed later. Because like if we go to the beach and he's in the sun and the water and the sand, like it gets you tired, right? So he's likely to pass out on the way home from the beach and then go to bed later, and that's fine. Like that. And so I always talk to people about keeping an eye on the seasons too. And for me living in Canada, I think in the UK is similar. Our seasons are so extreme. And so, you're going to probably sleep longer in the winter and shorter in the summer. And, in an ideal world, we could really just follow the rhythms of nature more. But obviously that's hard to do in our current culture. But
or if you live in like, my sister-in-law used to live in the Arctic Circle in like northern Sweden, so she like
oh my god,
there's
no sun.
Zero darkness and zero sun for certain parts of the year. So but and I think as well, another common concern that people have about low sleep needs, or things they might have been told, is that their child is going to be harmed or their development is going to be affected. And I think that's something we have to dispel here, because there is this idea, that obviously, as we're both sleep professionals, we know that sleep is important. We know that sleep is beneficial for brain development and growth and all these things. But it's this idea that more sleep is better. But if, like you say, you can't make someone sleep more than they need to. And a child who has 13 hours in 24 compared to, say, a child who has 9 or 10 hours is it no better, is it no more advantage developmentally? There is no evidence to suggest they are going to be like scientists and brain surgeons, and like the low sleep need kids are just these dum-dums.
I say to people they're efficient sleepers.
Yes, I like that.
And my very anecdotal evidence, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like this is what I've sort of observed, is a lot of times kids who are lower sleep needs tend to be early to meeting gross motor milestones. I know my son was, and that was also part of what interrupted his sleep, and why also was difficult around like the 6, because he was crawling at 6 months, and he was crawling in his sleep, and so it was waking him up in the middle of the night. Whereas I find when kids are like a little bit slower to pick up on those skills, they tend to sort of integrate them, and they don't it doesn't seem to disturb their sleep as much. But again, very anecdotal. There's no scientific evidence to this. I'm just saying, like, I've seen that happen quite a bit. And so I almost sort of like, in my mind, I'm like, he's just efficient, he gets his sleep and then he's ready to go and learn his stuff. But I mean, Yeah, it's hard to say because obviously I'm his mother and I think my kid is brilliant, but like he's really smart and he doesn't sleep much. Like he really is. So it's like there's just no truth to that at all.
The human race just wouldn't have evolved very far if everyone needed like a really, really large amount of sleep. Like from an evolutionary point of view, I think it makes sense that we all need different amounts of sleep and that we sleep in different ways so that as a tribe or whatever, that we can look out for each other. And there's just so much fear mongering and misinformation about sleep. You know, the idea that you have to have consolidated sleep in order to develop well, that's a total myth. Of course you don't. Sleep is sleep. It's like, you know, it's like saying broccoli is only good for you if you eat it sat at a table. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to have it in a nap in a cot, otherwise it's not good quality sleep.
It's
Unless
so there's no truth to any of that. We really don't know. I've even seen, because when I was looking into because I have a guide for dropping the nap, I was looking into the research about it and I found it was very interesting. Like again, very like cultural based. Even there was a study that looked at kids, I believe in Mississippi, and they compared Black kids versus white kids, and they found that the Black kids were more likely to nap later in life, but have shorter night times, whereas the white kids were more likely to not nap but have a shorter night. So again, or a longer night, sorry. So even in the same area, it's very cultural. So I found that really interesting. But I also found there's a lot of studies that were trying to look at, you know, are kids smarter if they nap longer? Like they really wanted to push for like kindergarten, like nap time and preschool nap time, and, you know, saying that cognitive development is better. And again, you just cannot generalize these things. For some kids who need the nap, absolutely, their cognitive development will be better if they get that nap because they need it. But for the kids that don't, like you're not helping them in that way. So, you know, in our culture, really, we want to like generalize, we want to have guidelines for everything and rules for everything, and it's just like human beings don't work that way.
It sort of message of like Western neurotic kind of
neurotic
model. Like we overparent, we over worry, and we just want the best. And the irony that then actually stops us giving our children the best, because it kind of feeds into this neurosis and we can't actually just enjoy it. And then our kids have these stressed out parents because we used the wrong sippy cup or whatever that we did that we weren't supposed to do.
I know, right? Yeah. And it's and I find that this breeds into like adult sleep too. It's not just kid sleep. Like there's this really weird belief, especially amongst like, you know, motivational speakers and like people who talk about that, like about early risers and like how successful people wake up early in the morning and they have morning routines and yada yada. It's like, again, there's like no evidence to that. Some people wake up early and do their stuff in the morning. Some people work until late in the evening, and they, you know, yes, we know that a lot of adults aren't getting enough sleep, and that has to do with a lot of things, has to do with probably we use too much screens and whatever, or we're not getting enough exercise. Like there's so many things that breed into that, but there's what I hate is that we've gotten to a point where we've put like morality on it. Like it's like you're a better person if you get up early and you do stuff in the morning and you drink your lemon juice and whatever, lemon water, or like, you know, if you're not getting enough sleep, like if you don't get your 8 hours of sleep, then like somehow you're like a slacker and you're not prioritizing your health. Like it's just, do you know what I mean? Like it's very like it's put a moral value on these things, which it's so weird.
All the time as well, because I swear 10 years ago people were talking, at least in the UK, about how little like it was a brag to be like, I only sleep 5 hours. Like, look how productive I am, in the sense of like, I'm a machine. And then if you had 8 hours, you were this lazy slob. And now it's like, no, you have to be in bed at 9 p.m. and wake at 5, or so you can't really win. Like it's just these weird ideas. And I know myself that I have tried pre-child many, many times to like be that person at a 6 a.m. exercise class, and they're like, oh, you never regret a workout. I regretted every single one. There was like, I was
I
always
never regretted sleeping.
I never you
Yeah.
know, but I can exercise at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and that's when it feels good for me, because that's my body clock. And it's just all
Yeah.
of our, so much information. We live in this world of constant information, and so whilst it's so great that we've got like the resources shared, the Sleep Foundation, we can know what's normal. At the same time, in the kind of the fast-paced world we live in, so much information is just thrown at you, and you just absorb these kind of, right, that's it, I need 8 hours, my kid needs 12 hours. You know, it can get so oversimplified and homogenized, and suddenly you start to think, right, every person needs 2,000 calories. Well, maybe they don't.
Oh my God, that too. Yeah.
You know?
There's like no, so shout out to another podcast that I love. Do you listen to Maintenance Phase?
Yes, I love it. Yeah.
Oh, I love them so much. And they break down all the like diet culture myths and whatever. And they did an episode on the 10,000 step thing, like how 10,000 steps is like the thing that you have to do. And it's literally comes from nowhere. It was just like a number that somebody was like, oh, that seems like a good number. Like there's no reason that every adult needs 10,000 steps. It's not a harmful thing to do, but like, you know, maybe you're getting 5,000 steps and you're good, right? Like, so it's all these things. And even like food, for example, like I'm the type of person that I cannot function without breakfast in the morning. I would rather, and I hate being late for anything, but I'd rather be late than not have breakfast. Like I need my coffee, and I need a meal. Like I need a good bagel or something that's going to fill me up in the morning. And some people don't, like, they don't even want to look at food in the morning. Some people can have like a juice and go about their day and then eat later. Neither one is better than the other. Like it just is whatever your body needs, right?
But I think what the sleep training industry does so well is that it finds people in this point of real vulnerability in their lives. And of course you're going to worry, especially if it's the first. Of course you're going to worry, why was my kid the last one to roll in my group of friends? Why do they seem to be more wakeful? Or even like people sometimes worry, like, why don't they wake as much as other babies? Are they sleeping too much? Like the world in which you can worry about your child's development, sleep, feeding,
there's always something.
It's limitless. And so what people can do now is they can tap into that and exploit it. And it sells way more to say, actually, here's this really unrealistic goal, and if you don't meet it, you're probably a really bad parent and you're letting your kid down. Or you could say, hey, like there's this huge range of normal, and you just have to find what works for you. It's not a sexy sell. Like it's not like a
no. I mean, I always say to people, it's like people like you and I, we talk ourselves out of a job, right? Because we tell people their kids are normal all the time. Like so many people who message me every day who are like, oh my God, like my kid is sleeping so much better because I follow you. But like, it's like they've never paid me a dime because they don't have to, you know? And so, whereas like the sleep training is like, this is this very specific thing that you have to do. Here's the rules. And if your child isn't meeting the rules, well, you probably need to buy my very expensive package so that I can help you. And, you know, that's a big thing. And I think what, like, nobody's asking parents. And one of the things I try to get to, like with every client, one of the first things is like, is this working for you? Like, is it a problem for you? And not because your mother-in-law says it's a problem or like whatever, whoever on the internet, but like for you, are you, because how many parents I talk to all the time that are like, yeah, my kid wakes up 3-4 times a night, but like I soothe them, I go back to sleep, everyone's good. Like, I don't mind. And it's just, and some parents do, and that's fair. Like some people, the way that they sleep is those 3 wakes are miserable for them, right?
One wake can be the worst thing ever because you might be awake for 2 hours. Anyway, like it's all relative to your situation. If your baby's really unsettled and screaming all night, 2 wakes is going to feel like hell. But if they're just snoozing and going back to sleep with a quick like feed or cuddle, you might not even notice it. That's the thing. It's or
if you're like bed sharing and your baby turns over and gets some boob on their own and then turns back to sleep, you might not even know they're awake. You're like, whatever, I don't know. So it's just like
everyone's the same, and we've got to just it just feeds in. I just think particularly motherhood, but parenthood, but I think particularly about being a mother, is just it's another unrealistic standard that we are berated for not meeting. And
we want to be good at it. like we want, and I think that's what it comes down to, right? Like as you become a mom, you're like, I'm going to do all the things right. I want to get it right. I want to be that good mom. And so you start looking things up because you want to make sure you're doing it right. And
Nothing in the world's going to ever mean more to you than the well-being and health of your children, like ultimately as well. So
so it's really hard to go with the flow, and we live in a culture where we haven't been taught to live with the to go with the flow from the get-go, right? We're from the very beginning, we're telling people this is the right way to do things. This is the right way to learn at school. Like you have to sit down and read a book, and like there's no, flexibility for different learners, for people who are neurodiverse. There's no different, like everybody has to fit into this. There's been so many studies that have found that teenagers benefit from a later start to school, and yet high school still starts early in a lot of places, right? And it's just like our culture just in general gets us to that point. So by the time you become a parent, you're so used to being given guidelines on how to live your life.
Yeah. So I just hope that people listening to this, if they have like a low sleep needs child, just feel reassured that actually you're not doing anything wrong. Your child there is zero evidence that your child is going to be harmed by having less sleep. And it's not forever either,
Yeah. I guess if we want to give people something to look for, if your child, I guess, and you can help me think of some signs that you might look for, but for me, like if your child is regularly seeming exhausted at a certain point in the day, like every day, it's really hard to make it to nap time or bedtime. That's something that I would be like, okay, probably we need to figure out that sleep somewhere, right? If it's like a consistent thing. Or kids that are like, I've had a parent tell me, everyone always comments that he looks tired, and he might have just woken up from a nap and he looks tired. Sometimes that's usually a big red flag for me for like low iron, because low iron can really make kids look lethargic and like pale, and I want to say exhibit A, you guys can't see me, but I have like really low iron right now. And I'm like, this is what it looks like. So that's a big sign. So like things like that. I don't know, what else would you look for? Like to say like, okay, yeah, maybe our child needs a little bit more sleep, or we need to.
Yeah, I suppose as they get older, like emotional regulation, obviously we're not expecting kids to like keep it together all the time, but definitely like with my own kid, I see when he's really, really dysregulated and really, obviously he's going to get upset about what we deem little things, but like there's upset and then there's like full force tornado of a meltdown. And I normally know that when he's like
tired.
I know it sounds really obvious. That
no, but that's good.
Emotional regulation, I guess, is like
but again, that's like trial and error, because what you might deem like a wild tantrum might be different for someone else, right? Like I know, for example, my son is generally pretty even keel, so if he's throwing like crazy tantrums, I'm like, what is going on? Whereas like I know some of my friends' kids they're just more emotional like that. Like that's just how they are. So you need to know your kid's baseline is what I'm saying. And you've tested it and you've seen the difference in your case. Like, oh yeah, when he's rested, he's better. He's more calm or whatever, more collected. Whereas when he's not, when he's tired, he's not, right? So again, trial and error and observing your child. It's like that's what we go back to.
That's not him. So when he's like trying something once and it's like, I'm just like, oh God. But not always, like you say, though. Sometimes it's other stuff going on for him, but yeah,
that's a big one. And then what else is there that I think? And sometimes, and like you said, sometimes fighting bedtimes can be overtiredness. But again, it just depends on what it looks like. There's so many things that could, and I mean that's a whole nother episode that involve like fighting bedtime.
Yeah, it is, because especially with I think babies and younger toddlers, an undertired child can just be like quite just you're trying whatever, you're trying to feed them or rock them or lay with them, whatever, and they're just like, meh, I'm happy. But that can then tip over into frustration if you're trying to make them sleep and they get angry and start arching their back and crying and frustrated because they're not tired. So it can look just so similar to overtiredness as well. It's so hard.
It is hard. Yeah. And that's again why you just kind of have to try it. And that's why I really hate this idea that like wake windows, that it affects brain development, because I see that a lot with clients where they're afraid to try a longer wake window because they are afraid their child is going to be overtired and they're going to affect their brain. And I'm like, no, like just, I get it. I always like the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to be overtired, but like, that isn't going to like ruin them. You're going to make up for it. Just like you did. Like when you said your son was overtired on his trip, what did you do? You canceled stuff and you let him sleep, right? And then he's fine. Like he's not like permanently harmed forever because you let him be overtired.
Yeah, overtiredness is not a serious problem. It can be fixed. It
can be fixed. Yeah. Exactly. And so just like it is with any one of us, again, like we've all been teenagers, we've all been out too late partying and been hungover. Like we've all had those days. And then it doesn't again, if it's chronic, like if you party for 10 years straight and like you never go to, sure, that might affect you, but like if it happens from time to time, it's not the end of the world. So I just want people to know that. But yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest thing. So and then get to know like your child's need if you are concerned, and if you are looking to, especially to kind of like figure out their schedule, if you need to kind of figure it out for your own sanity. That's what I usually start with, is I say figure out what their needs are, like what their 24-hour average is, and then kind of figure out how you distribute it. I find that can be easier, especially again for the lower sleep needs kid. Because then you might realize, oh, they only need 12 hours a night and I'm trying to get them to sleep 7 to 7. That's not going to work. I need to figure that out. They only need 12 hours in a 24-hour period, rather. So then you might be like, okay, something's got to give. And then figure out where you can let that go. Maybe it's a later bedtime. Maybe you're okay with them waking up earlier. Maybe you need to cap the nap. Like, you have to kind of do what also works for your family. I think we can have that middle ground of meeting both of your needs. It doesn't have to be just everything that like how your child dictates either. Because I think people think that people like us are all about following your child's lead and like never intervening. And for me, it's like, follow your child's lead and honor their humanity. And also you have a life that you have to live, right? So I think you can do both.
Yeah, totally. You could have, you could have boundaries and you can and find what works for the whole family. It's like,
especially if you have multiple kids. Now I have to figure that out.
No, that's the next challenge.
I hope she's an on-the-go napper, because she's not going to have a choice.
Yeah, it'll be fine. She'll be a unicorn sleeper, I'm sure.
Don't jinx me.
You might end up with one kid who's high sleep needs and one kid that's really low sleep needs.
That would be so nice. That would be so
but then I guess you're on like totally different. I don't know. It's probably easy to have the low sleep needs kid first.
Yeah. I could see, it'd be interesting though, because again, like we live our life on the go. So I don't know that I could do with a kid. Like it might be hard for me to have a kid that like needs to have like a 2-hour midday nap. I'm just gonna be like, how do I fit that in here? So interesting how it's different for everybody, right? And I think but going back to, we mentioned this a couple of times, but like know that it's normal that sometimes your needs don't match your child's needs. Sometimes your temperament doesn't match your child's temperament, right? Mm-hmm. I know my son would do much better on like a more consistent routine schedule just in general. And I'm not a routine oriented person, and neither is my husband. So that's really hard for us to kind of give him a lot of predictability.
But then he might have then two really stressed out, miserable parents who then aren't, you might be doing, so would he? Like that's the thing about an attachment relationship, right? Like it's a two-way relationship. And if you are like, I'm a control freak. there's a middle ground, like, you know,
Yeah.
to having too much routine, too much structure. But you've got, like, there's no, if I try and go too relaxed, I'm miserable as well. Like, you know, like maybe me cancelling like changing our holiday halfway through was more about my own need for control than my child's need for sleep. It's possible, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Fair
it
enough.
made us all enjoy the holiday better. So
Yeah. Like I hate when like my son's birthday's coming up in a few weeks and my mom is like, so what are you gonna feed everybody? And I was like, like I get stressed out as soon as I'm like, I don't know, I'll figure it out. Like I just can't deal with, like, that's too stressful for me. And some people need to know, like, they have their like lists made up already and whatever. So it's different. And so the point is to say, like, it's okay that there's sometimes is a mismatch, and it's okay to say, hey, you know what, my kid is really low sleep needs and it's really freaking hard for me because I'm very high sleep needs, and asking for help. And I know that that's a privilege that not everybody has, but like, how can you, this is really like a lot of the work I do. I'm sure you too, Hannah, is like, isn't making kids quote unquote sleep better. It's rather, how can we meet everybody's needs at the same time? Like, how can we mishmash and figure out what works best for everybody? Because yeah, so sometimes, yeah, you know, sometimes there's one partner who does get up every morning with the kids because they're the ones who can handle the early wakes. And sometimes, you know, there's like my husband doesn't handle waking up at night well. So I do the wakes, and it's fine. I truly, because I can sleep anywhere, anytime. So if I wake up, I'll go back to sleep. So I don't mind getting up and breastfeeding at night and going back to sleep, but I really like to sleep in the morning. So it's like, we kind of, you know, I'm like, okay, this is our trade-off. Like, I would really like you to let me sleep in, but you can sleep through the night. So it's okay to kind of have that, like, to honor your own differences, I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah. And I think I feel like I'm always saying this in every podcast, but you know, a big part of that, like, help, even if you haven't got help from other people, is coming back to that, like, how can you help yourself? How can you be kind to yourself? How can you give yourself a break in the situation? So, you know, and I think that's why I talk so much about having these unrealistic standards and worrying when you don't need to and things like that. How can you just give yourself a break? How can you let go of, are there any responsibilities or ideas that you're holding on to that actually aren't serving you? And and getting help can be in really small ways. You know, it can be talking to someone for half an hour. It can be, you know, it's just about like not pretending that everything's fine. It can, you know, help can be such a different.
I can think of one thing, like, I don't know about you, but this pregnancy has been tough. And my son has watched a lot of TV.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah.
While I nap.
Find yourself, put on the TV. Like, it's fine if you're holding on to this idea that, oh, screen time is awful, but it's, I mean, it's not, but like, you know, if that's something that you're kind of beating yourself up for, or like worrying about how much broccoli they've eaten or whatever, but actually, like, it's fine if that meal isn't like, and it's gonna not gonna like get many likes for it on Instagram or whatever, like, you know, give a break. Like,
it's not Instagram perfect.
fine.
Yeah, exactly. But like, what do you need? Yeah, in my case, like, I need to sleep.
Yeah. No sleep needs kid who's dropped their nap early. And you know what? If putting on an hour of TV in the middle of the day so that everyone gets some downtime is what's the big deal? Like, why? I mean, even saying out loud, I'm like, why would that even be an example of a bad thing? But I know for some people, they might beat themselves up.
It is, yeah.
I certainly wouldn't and don't, because like, TV has saved this. My life would have a very different.
I mean, that was kind of what we did. Like, I mean, that was our quiet time. Like, as soon as sort of he dropped his nap, it was like, okay, and to be honest, he needed it. Like, he needed, even though he didn't need a nap anymore, he needed some sort of a rest time in the middle of the day. And for him, that looked like watching TV. I mean, just for like you and I, it's relaxing to sit down and watch a show. That's what it was like for him. And you also get to know, I don't know, we're getting into screen time now, but like, again, you know your child, you know when your child has watched too much TV and when it's like affecting their, for sure, my son, if he's watched a few hours, he gets a little crazy. He starts to have accidents a lot. That's his big thing. Like, it's, even though he's like potty trained, because he's just like entranced on the TV, right? So that's when we're like, okay, enough is enough. But then there's time, but like an hour or two here and there, it's great. He's happy, and I mean, I argue he learns from TV and stuff too. So point is just, yeah, be kinder to yourself, and don't be afraid to try things. That's my biggest thing for everybody.
Amazing. Was there anything else you feel like we need to add about low sleep needs?
No, I think that's it. And obviously reach out if you guys ever want to discuss either Hannah or I love, like, my DMs are open if you just need to share your struggles. Sometimes people just tell me like, oh, I learned this and now I feel so much better. And that's all you need. I feel you. I feel you on the catnappers too. So if you have a catnapper, I got you.
It's tough. You want that break, and but
So
sorry, I meant to say it earlier, because you were talking about all the research into like memory development and naps and stuff. And one thing that jumped out at me about that there was one particular study where they were saying that basically naps are essential for memory development. But what was really interesting, what I read, was saying there was actually no difference in the memory like performance according to the length of the nap. So like children that napped for 10 minutes afterwards showed the same benefits for like the memory recall as they did if the children had napped for like an hour and a half. So I think I just wanted to mention that as well, because that's like when we see a study that says, well, children who nap have better memory recall, that's not the whole picture. Actually, you could nap for 5 minutes and you might still have the same benefits. Anyway,
that's so good though. Like, that's so important to mention, and that's with any studies around sleep. There's always more to the story. So just don't ever take it at face value.
And you shouldn't have a PhD in infant sleep or child development to be a good parent. Like you keep saying, look at your child, look at yourself. How's everyone doing? Is it really a problem?
Are we happy? Are we meeting everyone's needs? Are we relatively happy? Because you're not going to be happy all the time. No household with children is like perfectly peaceful and like,
But like, are we good enough? Basically, it comes down to that. Are we like good enough? Yes, probably. I think most people are.
Oh, this was so nice. I could chat with you forever. I could like,
I know,
have a bunch of, I hope this was helpful for people who are listening. And if you're coming on my podcast, check out Hannah's podcast. You've got a lot of good stuff there.
I'll put a link to yours in the show notes, and then we can help.
Perfect. Same. Yeah. So you guys, we have podcastception happening today. So check out each other's podcast. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being the first ever podcast combo. Thank you.
Awesome. This was fun. Well, thanks everybody. See you next time.
So again, a huge thanks to Paula, and if you want to find out more about her and her work or follow her on Instagram, I've linked to all the information you need in the show notes. And as ever, thank you to everyone that sends in feedback, questions, suggestions for future topics. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so via my own Instagram, which is @LittleNestSleep, and that's also in the show notes. So thanks again for listening, and I'll be back next week with another episode.